let's have a look at these headlines, which were sent in by a UK column viewer. So the Telegraph here, Jeremy Hunt faces Tory rebellion over 7 billion government spending on woke projects. And the Telegraph was here, but the Sun was also in on this. Woke waste, 7 billion of taxpayers' money splurged on woke roles and activities. Damning dossier reveals. Woke and broke. Jeremy Hunt faces Tory revolt as bombshell report reveals 7 billion of taxpayers' cash is wasted on woke projects. Now, initially, when I saw this headline, I found it difficult to grasp how the sum could be 7 billion, because you think about projects, you're not thinking about that scale. But this is the document. If we bring it up on screen, this is from Conservative Way Forward. It's just been published. You can see it on their website. Defunding politically motivated campaigns. And if we bring in the introduction, well, we just have a look at the key bit here. This report, compiled and investigated over a period of months, details over 7 billion worth of savings that are to be had by the British taxpayer if the government stops funding the politically motivated campaigns that are dividing us and making us poorer. So very interesting that they've really got stuck into this subject. Here's some of the detail. Section 1 of the report concerns equality, diversity and inclusivity, EDI. What are we looking at? Cost to the UK taxpayer, 557 million.
A year?
That's a year, yeah. Looks at government grants to charities, a total of 778 million a year to charities. Okay. Section 3 examines EDI-related public procurement contracts, and we're talking about 212 million every year. Section 4 details the largest part of the investigation, Quangos, 5.49 billion every year. These items are costing the taxpayer over 19 million every single day. And it goes on here to talk about freedom of information requests, 6,000 of them put into public authorities. So some of them central government departments, some devolved local councils, universities, schools, health boards, armed forces. So it really does appear that they've done their homework in this. And if we go through the document very quickly, people can, as I say, go and see it in detail for themselves. We've got ending the, it's talking about, it's talking about a total of 427 million in this section here. This one here, 397 local councils across UK. On average, every council employs 2 full-time staff members and has an annual expenditure of 67,000, so that's multiplied across the councils. There's detail in each of these various cities, and they identify certain councils. Bradford City Council, representing the 13th most deprived area in the UK, and that's got a number of these roles, 125 at a cost of 665,000.
And this is to actively promote these types of woke agendas?
Yeah, and we'll show a little bit of this in a moment. I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. We'll come back to it another day. But universities are included here. So they go through a lot of these sections. I've just taken these out as an example for our audience, but here's police forces, almost 5 EDI staff members for every police force, costing the taxpayer 10 million a year. Whitehall departments, 12 million a year. 150 million a year here when you consider British productivity as a whole, where we're losing days by putting people on these equality, diversity and inclusivity training courses. A lot of money disappearing out. They give case studies of where they've investigated charities. And this one is particularly interesting. It says, however, charities are directing more and more resources towards politically motivated campaigns which offer no productive value to the taxpayer and which create unnecessary division and toxicity in our political discourse.
I thought it was illegal for charities to pursue a political agenda.
Well, I'm going to use a stronger word a little bit later, but this is part of what they looked at here. Between 2017 and 2021, the government has handed 203 million to charities that have vocally and vociferously criticised the government's plan to process illegal immigrants in Rwanda. 203 million. This is only part of what this document's talking about. And this goes on to talk about the huge procurement contracts going out. 30 million by NHS England, 10 million NHS Confederation, 9.4 million DEFRA, 800,000 General Medical Council. This is all for EDI training, which is not really going to help anybody at all. More details here when we're looking at local authorities. 500,000 disappeared, 227,000 disappeared in these sorts of courses. So vast amounts of money. And Quangos are also in there, and they say they're responsible for handling 265 billion of money associated with this sort of training every year. Higher education is involved. And we've got advanced higher education receives 14 million in public money from universities procuring its services. Now, there was a quote from this lady, Michelle Donnellan, the former education secretary. She said she's describing the scheme as a dangerous initiative that undermines scholarship, divides our society, and undermines the global standing of our university system. And I think now we're homing in on what this is really about. But have a look at the Arts Council of England, which parade themselves of upstanding in what they do for the culture of this country. 642 million they're swallowing up at the moment. And here it's talking about 196 organisations that they're involved in can be identified as politically motivated. Even High Speed 2 is spending huge amounts of money on EDI because it is influencing every single contractor that is involved with the main contract. If you do a little bit of research on this amazing piece of research, if you go to the BBC, as I did, and I put in 7 billion funding woke agenda, well, I came up with absolutely nothing. And I don't think I'm surprised because, of course, it's the BBC that's a major instigator of this type of training itself. But my criticism of the report is this. There are certain key questions that Conservative Way Forward didn't ask. The first, I think, is which department or departments are responsible for the EDI policy, which ministers are responsible for this policy, which civil servants are responsible for the EDI policy. And when we see this lady making her statement, I think she's underselling what's really happening, because if we're spending this amount of money to destroy the country, we're talking about treason.
Okay, David, any thoughts on that?
Well, it was a very good report. We're seeing this everywhere, and it's been very clear for years that it is being funded centrally. It's funded through the government. The attack on our society is state-funded. Right? Now, whether actually identifying who makes the decisions is actually much more difficult, but the funding is very clear. And we've seen, for example, the introduction of the whole LGBT agenda into Aberdeen City Council was one that I looked at, and they just hired an activist. They hired someone whose entire life was pushing this particular political ideology. They put him on salary and gave him the job of teaching the teachers how to teach. And then it permeated through. It wasn't external, and it wasn't individual people being convinced by the argument. It was done centrally by the council, and they put the man on salary. They paid him to do this. So we are, through our taxation system, we are paying for the demise of our own society.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's orchestrated, and as Mark has demonstrated, this is coming from globalist policy. This is nothing to do with national policy in the first instance. And indeed, somebody in our chat box earlier in the news pointed out that the policy which is corrupting the children that the mothers in Wales have been protesting about, ultimately that policy comes back to UN UNESCO policy.
Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time, so we've got a couple of items to push into extra here. But before we go, David, final cartoon.
Final slide. It's a slightly older one. I think it's a Far Side one. And Rudolph's sitting enjoying a glass of wine, and the text says, "All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names." And on the wall behind, we've got the mounted heads of Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donna, and Blitzen, and the rifles leaning nonchalantly against the wall. So there you go. Rudolph managed to even the score.
Indeed.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, but we've got a lot more content for extra time. So if you're not somebody who's signed up with UK Column, that's one of the advantages of doing that. You can join us in the extra time. But we're going to say a very big thank you to everybody who's joined us again today. We know it's tough reporting, tough subjects that we're covering. We're going to ask you to stick with it, help us to spread the word about what's really happening. We will be back in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.